Hey, greetings everybody. David Chatham here with Angel Oak Creative. We are pleased to welcome you to the newest episode of Talking Tough. This episode, we're going to focus on one of the traits of nonprofit tough communities, and that those communities are engaged. And we have some real experts about engagement here today. With us, we have Clare Jordan, who is Director of Marketing and Philanthropic Engagement with CapDev. And we also have the president of CapDev, Allan Burrows. So thank you guys for taking the time to speak to us today. I have been a big fan of CapDev for years, followed you, and was so excited when you reached out to us about Nonprofit Tough and were willing to talk to us. So thank you for taking that time. And would love to just have you tell us a little bit about yourselves and CapDev and what you do there.
Thanks, David. In our typical order, I usually kick things off for us, and then Allan jumps in and has more to say. So if you don't mind, I'll just tell you, my background is all nonprofit marketing and development work, as is for everyone on our team, a background of development work, both as staff and as board members. And the reason we do this work is just because we have a heart and passion for nonprofits and what they do, and we love the strategy of being able to apply our skills to help nonprofits do what they do to help make the world better. As you noted, we added the term engagement to my title a few years ago because we don't only engage with organizations as nonprofits and institutions, but also with their supporters with them, nonprofits with each other in a collaborative fashion. So we definitely see the value of engagement.
Great.
Allan?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. And we are happy to be here, David. So thank you for the invitation as well. I too, like Clare, began my career in not-for-profit. I worked for two statewide children's organizations for the better part of almost a decade, and then joined CapDev in 1994 and have worked there consistently for those periods of time, became president in 2006. But like Clare, our passion is reaching out to organizations who are making a difference. And that can be from a small nascent organization to one of those major university institutions that called North Carolina, and all points in between. And I think what we like to think was where we see the relationships building out in our work with our nonprofits is that we love to see sustainable development programs. Our whole focus is capital campaigns, development plans, and executive search for nonprofits. So what we do that well. We don't veer too far into things like, I don't know, public relations and creative.
We appreciate that. We appreciate that.
But we know what we do, and we do it well because we have an incredible team of incredible dedicated staff, and excited about the work we've done. Again, over the course of 3 decades plus, we're working with all types of not-for-profits. So be it small or large, we fit well with any organization.
Well, you guys have a great reputation, and we were talking before, and we try to stay in our lane too. We try to keep it into that fundraising, communications, the marketing, the public relations, and let the experts like you guys handle the fundraising. So we appreciate you being there, and without you, we probably couldn't do what we do. So, so thank you. This idea of nonprofit tough. Every year we pick a theme, and last year we didn't know it, but going into it, we decided to choose the year of encouragement, and it just so happened to be that we really needed a lot of encouragement last year. This year, coming out of last year, we said, we saw nonprofits, most of them really lean into it, right? And really kind of show what grit is, to really show what it means to weather the storms that they're faced with COVID and just the challenges there. So we said, this would be a great year to talk about what it means to be nonprofit tough. What does that mean to you all when you're thinking about it, from the work that you do with your clients, from being in that nonprofit community every day? What have you seen communities face and kind of lean into and overcome over the years?
Allan, he said lean in, so I think you should speak first. That's Allan's word.
That was a phrase we actually used in the height of the pandemic last year, was how do we get organizations to lean into mission, to services, and quite frankly, to lean into donors and the board members. How does an organization weather something like a pandemic or a recession or what have you, been around for 3 decades plus, we've seen cycles of downturns in the economy, natural disasters, and this was part and parcel, a little bit bigger in the context it affected everyone. But so the whole messaging about leaning in, it really does. What we saw was resiliency in those organizations who chose to do that. So what we meant by leaning in was how more communicative can you be in the advent of you've shut down opportunities for engagement publicly. You basically were stationed at your home. How could you effectively communicate and be part of the community while you're sort of sitting in the elements of your home? And so a lot of the lean in was communication skills, relationship building skills, effective management skills, things that we practice sort of, if you will, somewhat all the time, but yet really heightened in the point of COVID. And then knowing where you are in the dynamic of what was happening back in the pandemic and what lessons have we learned. Back then, there were points where we always sort of say there's an initial surge that people want to get active and help. And so all these GoFundMe and opportunities to give and the COVID relief funds were set up and established, and people were just pouring out of their pockets. What that meant to some organizations that there was a little bit of a pause, be it arts organizations, education organizations, really the human service and the health took front and center during that period of time. But what often happens is that it goes from the surge to more than a sort of a step back and see what happens, and then back to a normalcy. And we saw this play out, David, almost to a T last year through early parts of this year, where we saw the initial surge, we saw during the summer lull, and then by the fall, we saw a lot of people sort of move back to what they hold near, dear, and clear to them and their donors' relationships. And so if organizations thought strategically, how do I engage people in the communicative way of empathy, understanding, and yet reminding them of their purpose, it will all unfold itself. We said, and another thing we said to folks is donors did not stop giving.
Yeah.
Early indications show that they actually increased their giving last year. So many don't. This is where we say we can progress and talk long-winded. Many organizations stopped some of the things they were doing. They stopped events. They stopped, and we're like, no, now is not time to stop. It may be change, but you don't stop communicating and connecting with donors.
Yeah. Yeah, it was amazing that we saw the exact same thing. It was the organizations that did lean in, that did say, you know what, this is an opportunity. It's a challenge, but it's an opportunity. We saw them gain more donors to get more donations coming in, to get more engagement from just a communications perspective. People asking questions, how can we help? All of those things, and the ones who went silent sadly missed an opportunity. And for whatever reason, I don't want to shame anybody, but it did seem like those who kind of pulled back and said, I don't know what to do, they missed an opportunity, I think, to exhibit what it means to be nonprofit tough, or to be this engaged nonprofit, and
You're right. You're right.
No,
You're right. They did miss an opportunity, and we do get those calls. I'm the one that answers those calls in our office, and I have heard from a handful that kind of completely shut down in a way that was really, I felt sad for them for last year. So I would just add that our word of the year last year, you had a theme. The word that we repeated over and over, a lot of people used, is adapt.
Yeah.
And if they weren't adaptive and innovative, they were struggling.
Yeah.
And the donors, as Allan said, really did step up. And so our big piece, in addition to lean in, is that stepping up. You've got to be transparent with them if you want them to continue to give, and you have to ask them.
Yeah.
It doesn't happen always passively. It can, but it happens a lot better and a lot bigger when you're actively asking and adapting.
Well, people don't know what to do unless you ask them or you tell them what you need, right? I mean, they're not mind readers, so they can make some assumptions, but unless you're communicating it. You guys have worked in the 30-something years that you've been around. You've worked on hundreds, if not thousands, of campaigns, right? And engagement. If you wait to engage with people till you get to a campaign, you're probably too late. Is that fair to say, Allan?
Yeah, I mean, when we start our client relationships, first and foremost, we start talking about it in a relational model, obviously between us and them, but trying to illustrate and sort of give them practice of then how do you look at your donor body? And as you've probably, David, sounds like you've heard me say, I know others have said it too, is there's a tendency for not-for-profits, especially in smaller not-for-profits, to sort of think transactionally, meaning ticket sales or the fish fry dinner or things of that nature, which by and of themselves are an integral part of an organizational's well-being because it does build market brand a little bit, and there's opportunities to have a collective feeling of sort of this commonality with a bunch of folks in the community. But if that's your reliance on asking direct mail or special events, then you relegated people to expect something in return. If you built like a ticket sort of a dinner or a golf event, that alone doesn't really mesh well if you think about a campaign. You've really got to turn that tide. And while you may bring somebody in through a special event, how do you then steward them for the rest of the year in the context of relational philanthropy? And the problem with a lot of small organizations, they're so knee deep in the day to day, they don't take the time to figure out how do I sustain that relationship that came to the golf tournament or whatever that is. And so a lot of our emphasis is building capacity with the organization to understand that is so integral to mission behavior and to outcomes and impact that you're having because you're relating to people.
The word I've been using recently along those lines of engagement, David, is loyalty.
Yeah.
We want to build loyal donors, the long-term relationship that Alan's describing.
Yeah.
Engagement builds loyalty. It's about what the donor cares about and essentially having the donor feel like they've joined your team for your cause with you. They're part of your team.
Yeah.
And I just feel like a campaign provides a good excuse to have those larger conversations that further and deepen engagement. Campaign gives you an excuse to have conversations you wouldn't normally otherwise get to have. We see that happen all the time. But here's the key to continue to build relationships after a campaign is important, because if you just have a campaign and you just raise those dollars and you stop right there, just like those people that stopped during COVID, donors will disengage with you too.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, it's I call it hit and run, right? You kind of get the money and then you run and then you kind of forget about that donor. And that's to me just a big miss in terms of the opportunity to create loyalty. I love that word. I think that's a great definition of really a donor that you want to have. You want them to be loyal. So as you engage with your clients and help them engage and work through a campaign and get even maybe after the campaign, you mentioned a lot of these organizations, they just don't have a lot of capacity, right? They may have a handful of staff, maybe one or two of those are focused on development or communications. The executive director is wearing 5 hats, as they always do. How can organizations with that type of limited capacity build those relationships? Does the board come into play there? What does that look like for an organization that might be tapped for their capacity to really take the time to do that kind of engaging work?
Yeah, and I'll start, David. I think one of the things we often look at in our sort of a pre-campaign assessment, if organization comes and says we'd like to do a campaign, we do look at what are the assets within the organization, meaning what are the either anywhere from the tangible being software to the intangible being the board dynamics and how the board can be engaged. A lot of emphasis on that. And the cliches of campaigns, we often say that annual funds are staff-driven, board-supported. Major campaigns, be it capital, endowment, what have you, are board-driven, staff-supported. A very much an inverted model because there's never much of a time when an organization says they're building, whatever their dynamic is, and they've got to raise 10 times as much in a campaign. They alone cannot do that. So therefore, the structure around quality of leadership is imperative for that success, and a lot of emphasis is placed on that relational model. I will say, and a shout out to the North Carolina Center for Nonprofits, I served 2 terms there as a board member, is they've crafted this model that they can share with any of their members about board ambassadorship. And it's a great tool to sort of measure what board would like to do. And then from that, turn that into board action that drives mission. And so board members are given an opportunity to sort of step into the relationship where they want to be and not where they're told. And they have a great success measurement utilizing that sort of tool. And it's a great tool that I got involved with and something we promote with a lot of our clients as well.
I'll tell you what I heard in what you just said, David, was that transition from loyalty to the onus that's on us, the nonprofit, for accountability.
Yeah.
If we want people to be loyal with us and we want to be loyal with them, we've got to demonstrate that we're accountable for that. And that's not up to any one person or any department or any position. It's what Allan's saying, that we're all ambassadors for the organization, all of us. And that kind of true engagement, I think, has to be really genuine. And to be genuine with that, you also need to be intentional and have a plan that helps guide that. And all of that helps you grow the pipeline, because then you deepen the sources of connections for participants in your organization to further engage with you. It's always growing that pipeline because we have to keep reinventing it.
Yeah. And, engagement can take a lot of approaches, right? It can take on a lot of forms. What are some of the different types of engagement that you guys have either participated in or seen that are, have varying degrees of capacity requirements, right? Some things are very personal, face-to-face. Other things are a little more at a distance. What does that look like in terms of that spectrum?
It's so funny you asked that, because just an hour ago, Allan and I were leading a session for the UNC Advancement Symposium on the topic of using journey mapping as a tool to guide your donor relations. And there are so many categories of areas that we could delve into on that topic, but because we were just talking about that, it's pretty, if you have another hour, we'll tell you all about all of those. But you could create a journey mapping tool just along the lines of how you steward donors, just to focus on that part. Allan, did you want to add to that?
I think the steward, you're talking about engagement of the ambassadors, that everybody has a role to play. The easy tool is stewardship. I will say you probably poll most boards of nonprofits and you ask how many people love fundraising, you may get like
crickets, right?
Yeah. But if you say how many people like to thank donors, I think you'll get 10 out of 10, hopefully. And that's an easy, the beginnings of the donor model, the relational model that we stress, is ways to sort of communicate. So there's the official acknowledgement that comes from the staff, might be a personal note from the executive director a week or two later, but there's a call or an email from a board member that says, hey, by the way, I wanted to say thank you. I'm a board member and I volunteer. So those are simple tools to get people more comfortable in this sphere of philanthropy, not fundraising, but philanthropy, because it's a stewarding model that we firmly believe in and see the results because board members feel more comfortable. And as they get more comfortable, as Claire said earlier about this sort of onus of accountability, the transparency becomes more readily available. People feel much more readily seeing the impact of the organization, both donors and board members. And so they're more apt to open more doors and relationships because they know they're not being treated or corralled into a transactional model, but of a relational model. And I've really seen that 35 years of doing this. That's the path.
That's great. Well, very coincidental. I had no idea you were doing that presentation today. So that was very fortuitous that we were talking about that as well. So kind of as we wrap up, what advice about building relationships would you give to organizations and those who support them? It really is a two-way street, right? Donors, to your point, Claire, there is a level of accountability, I think, on both sides, right? If you do have that relationship, you do expect certain things of each other. So what is one thing, or maybe a couple of things that, you would really say, if you're not doing this, you really should be, right?
The thing I think I've learned in 15 years with CapDev is just to be yourself, to find your own comfort level in not being afraid to have real conversations with donors or leaders or anyone, because we're all just regular people, whether we run a foundation or a giant company, or we're just a regular ongoing monthly donor. But to have real earnest conversations and genuinely listen and get to know people, you just start the conversation. This is what I always say, with a thank you. Number one, thank you. Number two, asking, why are you involved? What's your interest? What keeps you here? Those are the greatest answers you get, asking those questions. And thirdly, I always like ending with, is there anything else? Because usually there is something else if you ask.
That's great.
Well,
Alan?
and then the advent of at your fingertip communications, surveys to donors,
Uh-huh.
annual, biannual, simply, sort of asking feedback on how do you like to be approached and things like that. I mean, 5 or 6 questions alone gives you great data to understand where donors are and where they want to reach you and meet you. So oftentimes we encourage some type of, outgoing of communications with donors about how best to approach them, when to approach them, and what impact do they want to see more of. So David, something we talk about often is, we just said this a little earlier too, is that organizations aren't the reason why people give.
Yeah.
They're not the reason why. The reason why is what the people love to want and be a part of a successful venture in addressing whatever the issue is that they feel connected to. The organization is simply the shepherd, the conduit, the wherewithal to develop strategies to impact the connections that they love, whatever that passion is, be it hunger, be it homelessness, be it service, whatever those dynamics are. And so we've got to get sometimes not for profit. It's not about them. It's about the mission that they love and support. And that's where they should be on the side of the donors and not across the table from the donor. And that's how we try to help them frame it as you are part of the solution. Donors want to be part of the solution with you, if you will, not sitting across from the table, but sitting next to you. And that visual alone tries to help people understand donors aren't arm's length away from you. They want to be engaged. They want to hear impact. They want to hear results. They want to know that you're doing what you say you're doing. So all those tools are readily available through survey, through website communications, through board engagement, things that we talked about today, just to give donors greater confidence and accountability, the word that Claire used earlier.
The term we just used for that in this UNC conference was to be a philanthropic facilitator.
Yep.
Think of yourself that way.
That's great. Yeah, and you're talking my love language with surveys. It's they're such a great tool, such a low barrier to entry for them too, right? I mean, whether you've got SurveyMonkey or you're using a poll on LinkedIn, there is so much value in just asking someone to speak into what you're doing, right? Beyond the results that you get. I mean, just giving them a sense of ownership and investment in the organization by being able to influence it in some way has so much value. I mean, I get just so many positive, so much positive feedback from people who take a survey and they just say, thank you for letting me, share this with you. And, I think that I've done it with hundreds of thousands of members for a bar association and with, 20 donors at a small nonprofit, and all of them, the results are great, but the experience of the survey at times is really where the value comes in.
Right.
So I'm glad you mentioned that. I think that's great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. I wish we had more time. I always do. Thank you so much for your time. Any last words of wisdom that you would like to provide to our audience today?
I always tell organizations if you can do it yourself, try to look at your organization with outside eyes as if you were the consultant looking in. And if you can't do it yourself, ask a few people to do it with you or for you.
That's great.
Yeah, and my encouragement is sometimes a refresh button. For example, it may be as simple as having the board chair, having some conversation with the board chair about leadership, and that the board chair communicates with the rest of the board about we're going to go on a journey together. We're going to learn to be better bridge builders, relational model of philanthropy. We're going to learn through our staff, through organizations that can support our endeavors, but we want to do this together and we want time to understand each other. So having that cultural built so that as board members ebb and flow, come in and out, there's a cultural dynamic that exists. And that's something we see for organizations who remain sort of successful. That's one of the primary sort of components of their success is a general board understanding and cultural commitment, if you will.
I love the intentionality of that, of really stating real clearly, right, that expectation and also the hope that you have, that you're going to all be working together.
Yeah.
If somebody wants to learn about CapDev, where can they go? Where can they engage with you?
Easiest thing is to go to our website, capdev.com, and they'll find my email all over it. So contacting me is the best first step, and it's cjordan@capdev.com.
Great. Well, thank you both so much for your time today, for the great insights and advice. You can't really you can't get 34 years of experience in 20 minutes, but we appreciate you sharing that, and would certainly encourage anybody looking for assistance with philanthropy and really wanting to build that philanthropy culture to reach out to you guys. So thank you so much, and look forward to staying in touch, and keep going nonprofit tough out there.
Thanks, David.
Thank you, David. Thank you.